Before we get to the scheduled guests for today, little tales from the couch a week in to the NBA season. And we can always check in with Cerruti for his magic minute. But I want to start with the Lakers' overtime win at San Antonio. Spurs closed the third quarter in an 18-3 run. You're like, okay, here we go. Young, energetic Spurs team. I asked social media last night a very pressing question. Did Toronto lose the Jakob Poeltl trade? If you remember, DeRozan and Jakob Poeltl to San Antonio for Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi was kind of the last superstar that was traded before it was understood that you were supposed to get like 7 picks and then a bunch of swaps. Where I do think there'll be some correction on that at some point. I'm just not quite sure when. Because if I were trading a really good player, I'd be like, I'd still like a good player back instead of 3 swaps that are probably never going to happen. And then, I don't know. Because there was a couple trades we were talking about the other day with friends. It was like, well, if this team A, traded this player to Team B, and Team B is always going to be better than them for the next 4 years. Yes, unforeseen things could happen, but it's most likely that the team that's getting the player is going to be better. So all the pick swaps don't matter. And that's why I still love Houston asking for a pick swap last year with Brooklyn. It's one of my favorite all-time notes on a transaction. So DeJounte Murray was awesome last night. He gets lost in a sea of point guard depth. Jakob Poeltl's been really good so far this season. He's somebody I've always liked. Keldon Johnson. Then there's other guys running around, Lonnie Walker, Diop Bates, just, shout out if you forgot about him. But he's still out there as well. And so, you're looking at the Lakers going, no LeBron tonight. What's going to happen? And the Lakers come storming back in the fourth quarter. And really what I was looking at here, and they won it in overtime. And the result itself doesn't mean a ton to me, at least not right now. But it's about what I said during the lead up to the season and figuring out where the rotations are at. Because you look at somebody like Melo, right? Melo had 28 points on Sunday. He made his first shot with a minute left in regulation last night. He made one shot in 30 minutes. And that's what's going to happen with Melo. Like, I like that Melo's capable of getting you buckets. I like that he's still playing. I like Carmelo Anthony, but that's going to happen sometimes. So to mark him down as a certainty, I don't know if that makes a ton of sense. Westbrook absolutely filled up the stat sheet. I also think, watching him without LeBron, you could just see, hey, now I don't have to defer to anybody. And that's another thing I started thinking about Russ, and maybe I'll spend a little bit more time on this at the end. But even I've long documented problems with some of the ways that Russell Westbrook approaches the game. Him being deferential is probably way worse than him being bad decision Russ. So he was terrific because he didn't really have to think about anything last night. But this rotation is not settled. I didn't think it would be settled for a long time. There's still 3 guys that could be in the rotation that are out with injuries. So if you look at it, the Lakers have played 11 guys real rotation minutes so far in 4 games. That's without Talen Horton-Tucker. That's without Kendrick Nunn. And that's without Ariza. So to this point, that's 11 guys playing real rotation minutes. DeAndre Jordan's playing a decent amount of time. Dwight, is at least, over double-digit minutes. Again, they're kind of shuffling things around. Rondo's gone 20, 14, and 20 minutes in 3 games. But something that I thought was interesting last night was that Russell Westbrook came out of the game at 4:50 of the fourth quarter. Rondo was in. Rondo was also in with Austin Reeves. Shout out to Austin Reeves' efficiency numbers right now, because he's just knocking down every shot. 23-year-old rookie that you may not have heard about. Him or Josh Giddey at this point probably are the most, wait, that guy's in the NBA reaction from the casual. And look, sometimes we can all be casuals. And so it was apparently going to be a minute rest for Westbrook. And then Vogel sent Bazemore and Westbrook back to the scores table at just over 3:30 left to go in the game. But it was one of those weird stretches. Remember when Van Gundy wanted to put Zion Williamson back in overtime and he just let him just rot at the scorers table for like 4 minutes of game time? And you're like, okay, maybe figure out a way to get Zion Williamson into the game. This was not the same level of importance. This wasn't the same situation because the Lakers were kind of battling the whole time as they'd come back in this fourth quarter. But both Westbrook and Bazemore didn't get back in until 43 seconds left on a free throw check-in. And that's why Austin Reeves and Rondo, who's, been okay, not great so far this season. And I was thinking, I wonder what Westbrook's thinking going, all right, I'm out in the fourth quarter and Austin Reeves and Rondo are running around out there. Like, what the hell is this? And then again, the game, the way it played out, he wasn't going to sit there and rot for the next 3 minutes, but he did. So that was just something I thought was interesting because, AD was a monster again, even though he went down with a knee injury where it looked like he was going to be out for the season again. And when he goes down, I'm like, oh man, is he hurt again? And, there's not as much of a thing where when LeBron goes down, I'm like, he's just going to get right back up. AD, I never know. I seriously never know. He spent so much time on the floor, but he's just so good. He's great in the matchup where he's playing center again. And, he could just shoot for a guy that's that big. We already know about Anthony Davis, but it was just kind of one of those deals. There's no LeBron. Monk hit a huge three for him, but Westbrook not having to worry about how he fits in is why you could see him just, not care, like get into his single-mindedness, which I think can be both great and really frustrating at the same time. But none of this is going to be solved anytime soon. And anyone that's ever worked with a team, when things aren't going right, the coach immediately gets the blame for not locking up the rotation. And as I've said the entire time, this is a very hard rotation to say, okay, here are 8 or 9 guys. It's like, there's going to be some guys with some resumes here or guys that had an expectation. It's like, cool, we're all Lakers. Yeah, well, you 4 don't get to play. So I am not doomsday. Oh, Lakers can't play with any young teams. They can't do any of this stuff. LeBron and AD, when they're healthy, is enough to still be a contender in the West. It just is. And because there's no other Warriors, right? This isn't peak Nets that we've probably overvalued, even though I still think it's going to be incredible if those guys ever do play together. Because it was incredible last year for stretches when they weren't all together. But we were so conditioned to the super teams of the last 10 years, the Miami Heat. How are you going to get past them? How are you going to get past this Warriors team? That Cleveland team that was losing in the finals, and certainly the 16 team that came back. Those are incredible. The best thing, if you're a fan of any of those 5 or 6 teams at the top of the West or the East, because the top of the East feels deeper than it has been in a long time. There's no one that scares you. All right. There's no one that scares you. There really was no one that scared you unless it was the version of the Nets that still had never done it before. But there's nobody, at least right now, that scares the hell out of you. So even if the Lakers are going to get off to a slow start, and I thought it was going to take a long time for Vogel to kind of figure out exactly who's going to be what. And, the Westbrook thing was great for a night. But again, with LeBron, he's not going to play that way. I wouldn't think, but I still think he can carry you through regular season games. All right. Philadelphia looked terrible last night. Whatever. Embiid got doubled. I don't know what the second spectrum stuff would be on this, but I would argue that was one of the most double-teamed nights that we've seen since Don Draper went out to L.A. Philly, I'm not going to make a ton out of this. I think anytime they're going to look bad, though, the media is going to play the results. They're going to be very predictable in that if the Sixers go through a bad stretch, they're going to blame the Ben Simmons distraction on it. And if they go through a good stretch, people will say they rallied around the Ben Simmons distraction. And I don't know if either one are accurate. I just know how we work and how we do things. And that's what's going to end up happening. And I also need to do this. I need to give the Knicks more love. Now, I'm not talking about first tier of the East love, but I think I've been pretty fair about it, that their top talent doesn't have the depth of the other great teams or, potentially great teams in the East. But their depth is just better than it's been. Like if their starting group is Randall, RJ, Evan Fournier, who, whatever you think of Fournier's here's an example. Embiid's floor to ceiling is anybody better than this guy in the entire league? That's how good it can be. His floor is he's falling down a ton tonight. He's forcing it because that's what he'll do with double teams. And you can almost see Embiid going through it. And the Knicks example was one of the best that we've seen of this, is that he knows what to do. Embiid's a terrific passer. He was a terrific passer in college, anticipating and playing against the double team and setting up the rotation and all these different. He had a great setup where he got the ball out, it spun around, and it was to Danny Green in the far right corner, and he airballed it. And Embiid had done exactly everything he was supposed to do. But then you can see Embiid through his head, working through it, going, all right, well, if I keep passing out of the double teams, then I'm a jerk because I'm not imposing my will, and now Shaq's going to make fun of me on TNT. And then Embiid can get to the what's the floor version of him, where you're like, now you're just ramming into guys and you're falling down and you're turning the basketball over and you're not reading the double quick enough. You don't see it coming. Like, what are you doing? which I think is I think Embiid knows when he's doing it. I just think that he tries to force the issue to be a guy that is considered in that first tier of players. But on the other side, if you look through the depth for the Knicks, again, Randall, RJ, Fournier, Kemba, which is still, a 50-50 proposition on his extended health and how much he got ate up defensively when he wasn't healthy with Boston. And then obviously Mitchell Robinson. And then you have 5 real players to back that up with Rose, Taj, quickly, certainly, Alec Burks, and the Obi Toppin minutes at the 5 where he's playing this small ball center just looks good. It looks good. So Knicks depth, nice win. More love for the Knicks. Not enough to push them all the way up to the top of the East. All right. Couple quick hitters before I bounce on this. Josh Giddey has surpassed Poku on the depth chart. Josh Giddey, the Australian teenager, is in the closing group with the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Thunder, again, are not good, and we'll leave it at that. But they have a lot of guys that you're wondering about. But remember, the Thunder stayed through 40-plus games around 500 until they went full-on tank mode. And Shai Gilgeous was terrific last night. Jalen Green, the number 2 overall pick for the Houston Rockets, he has 0 free throws this season. That makes 0 sense if you watch his game. I have not watched closely enough to see if it's the way he's being officiated. I saw a couple people floating with that his game, although drive heavy, he's not initiating enough contact. That very well could be the case because there's a difference between driving to stay clear of contact and driving to contact. And, as much as you can all drive is crazy, driving to contact is a much more efficient way to play basketball. And especially if you're big enough to absorb the contact and still finish. But if you're constantly trying to avoid it all the time, and he certainly fits the profile of somebody whose build is going to be big enough to carry that size and strength and eventually initiate contact and still finish against guys. I'm not going to make a huge deal out of this. But that's just weird. He has 0 free throws. And speaking of the Rockets in their loss last night to Dallas, where it was actually close at the half, the Mavs played 15 players. They played everybody because apparently a 3-man leadership council, the Dallas Mavericks, who we're not allowed to know who's on the council, said, hey, can everybody play tonight? And they did it. They played everybody. The other Josh Green, the Arizona draft pick, he got 4 minutes. This is when it gets a little tough. You're like, all right, how many Mavs do you have to look up to just double check? Moses Brown, we know about him. Chin up, never head down when you're playing for UCLA. Frank Ntilikina, an efficient 3 minutes, hit all one of his shots from the floor. Trey Burke, you knew he was on the team. This is an extension. SMU Sterling Brown, 9 minutes. People had a field day with this one. People loved it, but really they hated it because I think everybody went in. There is we talk about pre-existing conditions. There are pre-existing conditions for certain head coaches, and Jason Kidd has those. So anytime Dallas does anything that's weird, although I still think for the most part, Dallas looks completely the same. As far as the guys out there, not necessarily the same exact things that they're doing before with Carlisle. But people were just like, hey, this sounds stupid. I remember our team did it in junior high one year, and it was really dumb because I think we had 20 guys, and we had a guidance counselor who filled in for a year as a head coach, and he just wanted to make everybody feel good. And then it was so stupid. You just couldn't contain what was going on. Practices were a mess. Nothing was efficient. And it was so we're doing youth soccer. We're keeping score of these games, folks. So there you go. First week, Tales from the Couch.